What had actually happened was this. 7 years earlier, before Fort Campbell, before the battalion, before any of the operational assignments that appeared in the visible portion of her record, Major Lena Carver, then Captain Carver, then without the rank she now held, and without most of the things those years had added to her in ways both documented and not, had completed a 12-month assessment process that had ended with her assignment to an organization whose name did not appear in any document available at any standard classification level. The assessment had been unlike any other assessment she had been through in 8 years of Army service, because it was not designed to find out what she could do under maximum physical stress. It was designed to find out something considerably more specific and considerably harder to measure, whether she could be someone else. The organization, she thought of it internally as the unit because it had a formal designation she was trained not to use in any context where it might be overheard, operated in the space between conventional intelligence work and law enforcement, in a specific and poorly understood territory where the two came close enough together to blur. Its mission was the dismantlement of networks, financial networks, weapons networks, networks of people and money and information that sustained things the government wanted unsustained from the inside rather than the outside. Not surveillance, not signals, not the clean, remote work of analysts in secured rooms. The unit put people inside things and left them there, sometimes for months, sometimes for years, and waited. She had been selected because of 3 things that the assessment process had identified and that she had never discussed with anyone, not even the officers who made the selection, in any language more direct than the implicit language of her scores. She was very good at listening without appearing to listen. She was very good at becoming unremarkable in whatever environment she entered, and she had a memory for human behavior, for pattern, for rhythm, for the specific texture of how people moved and spoke and made decisions under various kinds of pressure that the assessment psychologist had noted as in a 98th percentile of personnel assessed in the past 4 years, with particular strength in the detection of behavioral inconsistency. She was, in a language the unit used for people like her, a natural. The 7 years that followed were not documented in any file available to Colonel Tice, to the brigade commander, to the general who reviewed the investigation, or to the investigating officer who had spent 3 weeks trying to understand why she'd pulled that database record. They existed in files that required a clearance level that only 41 people in the Department of Defense currently held, and none of those 41 people were at Fort Campbell, and none of them were being asked. The 43 cells she had dismantled, the word was clinical and she had never loved it, but it was accurate, were documented in those files. The 7 years of work, the 14 separate cover identities, the 3 occasions on which the cover had come close enough to breaking that the unit's extraction protocols had been quietly activated and then stood down when she held the identity through the pressure point that had triggered them. The specific human cost of those 7 years and the particular currency that didn't appear in any report. All of that was in those files. She had left the unit 14 months ago, not because she'd been pushed out. The unit's director had asked her to stay, had made the case with unusual directness that people with her profile did not reappear on a generation's timescale, but because she had reached a point that people in that work sometimes reached, a point she did not have good words for, but that had something to do with the specific exhaustion of having been other people for so long that the weight of returning to yourself required more than she was currently able to give it. She had asked for a conventional assignment. She had been given one. She had spent 14 months at Fort Campbell building the specific, unfamiliar life of a person who was simply themselves in a place where people could see them, with a name that was her own and a rank that was documented and a set of professional responsibilities that were, by the standards of her preceding 7 years, almost aggressively normal. She had been doing well at it. Not perfectly. There were aspects of normal that she was still recalibrating toward, social rhythms and institutional expectations that she was relearning from the inside out, but adequately, functionally, with a steady, patient application she brought to everything. And then, 23 days ago, she had been sitting at her desk reviewing an unrelated training document and had seen, in a piece of administrative correspondence that should not have contained the information it contained, a name. The name was not hers. It was not anyone she knew personally, not in the conventional sense. It was a name she knew the way you know the names of things that have cost you something. A name attached to a network she had spent 11 months of her second year in the unit working to dismantle. A network whose financier she had spent 6 of those 11 months building toward through 3 separate intermediate targets. A network that she had ultimately delivered a targeting package on that the unit's analysis section had rated as sufficient for prosecution-level action. The prosecution-level action had not occurred. She had learned this afterward, through channels that were not official and were not entirely appropriate. Because the outcome of her work was above her pay grade to be informed of, and she had found out anyway. Because 7 years of that work had left her with the specific habit of needing to know what happened to the things she had handed off. The financier was still operating. The network had reconstituted around the gap she had opened in it, the way networks did when you removed a component without removing the architecture. She had known this for 8 months and had filed it in the category of things she no longer controlled and had to accept she no longer controlled. And then the name had appeared in an administrative document it had no business being in, attached to a financial instrument it had no business being attached to, in a context that, to someone who had spent 11 months studying this particular network's operating signatures, was immediately and unmistakably recognizable as active. She had accessed the classified database to confirm what she thought she was seeing. She had confirmed it in 4 minutes and 31 seconds. She had logged out. She had then spent 3 days deciding what to do with what she'd confirmed, because the correct channel for this information was a channel she was no longer authorized to use, and the incorrect channels were all she currently had access to, and using an incorrect channel to pass information about an active network reconstitution was its own category of problem, potentially more damaging than the unauthorized database access, in a specific way that fixing the wrong thing the wrong way could make the right thing harder to fix correctly. She had ultimately submitted a written report to a former unit contact whose current assignment gave her the authority to receive it through a personal communication channel rather than an official one, which was also not entirely by the book, but was at least directed at someone with the clearance and the context to understand what they were receiving. The report had been acknowledged. She did not know what had happened to it after that. What had happened in the visible world, meanwhile, was the investigation and the reassignment. She had accepted both. She could have explained, not to the investigating officer, whose clearance was insufficient, but she could have requested that the investigation be referred to someone with the appropriate clearance level. She could have made that request. She had not, for 2 reasons. The first was that making the request would have required revealing, at least implicitly, the nature of the information she had been protecting, which would in turn have required a disclosure process that would have pulled her back into a world she had worked very hard, at significant personal cost, to step back from. The second was that she had spent 7 years doing things that were not explainable to people without clearance, and she had learned in those 7 years that the willingness to absorb an outcome you didn't deserve, when the alternative was compromising something that mattered more than the outcome, was not weakness. It was a specific kind of decision made clearly with full understanding of the cost. Fort Polk was the cost. She could manage Fort Polk. She arrived at Fort Polk on a Wednesday, which was an unremarkable day to arrive anywhere. She checked in at the Warrior Transition Battalion's administrative office, received her assignment to the training support cadre, was shown to her temporary quarters by a specialist who told her his name and immediately forgot she'd heard it in the specific forgetting that happened when you had been a different person for long enough that the habit of not retaining unnecessary information had become structural. The training support cadre occupied a low brick building near the western edge of the main cantonment area. It had the particular atmosphere of a place that housed people in transit. Not quite a waiting room, because people were actually working, but with the specific energy of work being performed in a key one step down from whatever key the performers were calibrated for. Most of the officers assigned there were, as Webb had suggested, people who had collided with something institutional and were now moving at reduced velocity, while the institution decided what to do with them. Carver's supervisor in the cadre was a lieutenant colonel named Patricia Solis, who had been at Fort Polk for 6 months following a tour in which she had been involved in a contracting dispute that had been resolved in her favor, but had generated enough friction to produce a reassignment anyway. She was competent, direct, and possessed of the specific wariness of someone who has been treated unjustly by a system and has arrived at a precise and sustainable relationship with her own resentment of it. Solis reviewed Carver's file on her first day and said, with the economy of someone who had learned not to waste language, "Your file is interesting." "In what sense, ma'am?" Carver said. "In the sense that it has a large section I can't read," Solis said. "I have a TS/SCI, and your file has a section that my clearance doesn't open. I've been doing this for 22 years. I've seen maybe 4 files like that." "Yes, ma'am. Are you going to tell me what's in it?" "No, ma'am." Solis looked at her for a moment. She had, Carver thought, the particular attentiveness of someone who had learned to read what people said by reading what they didn't say, which was a skill Carver recognized from practice. "Are you going to be a problem?" Solis said. "No, ma'am," Carver said. "Are you going to be bored?" Carver considered this honestly. "Probably," she said. "I'll manage it." Solis looked at her for one more beat, then nodded. "Fine, you're on training schedule development. It needs work. I'll give you a week to tell me what's wrong with it and how to fix it." "A week is more than I need, ma'am," Carver said. Solis raised an eyebrow. "How long do you need?" "May I see it now?" Solis slid the binder across the desk. Carver read it for 22 minutes. She made 4 pages of notes in her own shorthand. She handed the notes to Solis. Solis read the notes. "Then read them again." "You found 14 structural issues in 22 minutes," she said. 15, Carver said. "The last one is more of an observation than an issue. I wasn't sure whether to include it." "Include it next time," Solis said. It was the beginning of a working relationship that Carver would, much later, describe as one of the more professionally functional of her career, which said something specific about both women and about the particular environment that Fort Polk, for all its reputation as a professional waiting room, actually turned out to be. She had been at Fort Polk for 39 days when the call came. It came through official channels, which surprised her on a Tuesday afternoon while she was sitting at her desk annotating a training module on land navigation that had not been updated since 2014 and contained 3 factual errors she was intending to correct before she submitted it to Solis. The caller identified himself as Colonel Warren Phelps, assigned to a headquarters she recognized, would have recognized, she thought, in her sleep, in any of her former cover identities, in any of the 3 languages she had operated in, as the unit's parent command. "Major Carver," Phelps said. "Yes, sir," she said. "We need to talk about your report." She set down her pen. "Which report, sir?" There was a brief pause. "The one you submitted 37 days ago through an unofficial channel regarding the network reconstitution." "I'd like to have that conversation in a secured format, sir," she said. "Yes," he said. "I know. That's why I'm calling. Can you be at the SCIF at Fort Polk in 45 minutes? She looked at the land navigation module. She put the cap on her pen. "I can be there in 30, sir," she said. What Phelps told her in the SCDF at Fort Polk 41 minutes later was this. Her report had been received and processed. The information it contained had been cross-referenced against 3 existing files that the unit's current analytical team had been working on in parallel. The cross-reference had produced a convergence, a specific operational picture that had been incomplete in 3 separate analytical streams and was now complete in one that the unit's director had described. In an internal memorandum she would be permitted to read in this room, but not take with her as the single most significant intelligence convergence related to this network in the 4 years since the original dismantlement operation. The financier she had identified, the one whose name had appeared in the administrative document attached to the financial instrument, had been located. Not geographically, not yet, but operationally. His current role in the reconstituted network had been identified, his communications pattern had been mapped, and the access point she had found and documented was the leverage point the unit's analysts had needed to construct a prosecution-level targeting package on the reconstituted structure rather than just the individual. The unauthorized database access, Phelps said, carefully, precisely, in a manner of someone who had thought about how to say this and was choosing every word, had directly produced information without which this outcome would not have been possible in the timeline in which it had occurred. She said nothing while he said this. She had said nothing for most of the conversation. This was not unusual. It was simply how she listened. "The investigation finding," she said finally, "is being reviewed," Phelps said, "at a level above the one that issued it, with the full record, which the original investigating officer did not have access to." The reassignment is also being reviewed. She looked at a point in the middle distance that was not quite any of the walls of the SCAF. The specific look of someone organizing what they've just heard against what they already knew and deciding which questions mattered. The network, she said. The reconstitution. What's the current timeline on action? Phelps looked at her for a moment. There was something in his expression, something she had seen before, in other rooms, on the faces of people who had expected a different question and were deciding whether that was a problem. That's not something I'm in a position to discuss with you in your current assignment, he said. I know, she said. I was asking anyway. I know you were, he said. A beat. The director asked me to ask you something, Phelps said. Off the record, in the sense that your answer won't be documented anywhere. But genuinely, the director wanted me to ask. She waited. Would you come back? She looked at the wall of the SCIF, which was the same beige as every SCF wall in every secured facility she had ever sat in, a color that existed precisely because it was not memorable, that had become, over 7 years, one of the most familiar colors in her world. No, she said. Is that a final answer, or is it the answer you're giving today? She thought about this honestly, with the specific honesty she applied to questions that mattered. Today, she said. Ask me again in a year. Phelps nodded. He did not push it, because he was a man who understood the specific weight of what 7 years of that work extracted and the specific patience required by the process of putting it back. The reviewing authority will be in contact, he said, regarding the investigation, finding, and the reassignment. I don't know the timeline. These things move at their own pace. They do, she said. Is there anything you need in the interim? She thought about this too. The land navigation module I'm working on, she said. It hasn't been updated since 2014. There are 3 factual errors in the terrain association section. Someone should have caught them before now. Phelps stared at her. He blinked once. Then something moved across his face that was either profound respect or profound confusion, or possibly both. I'll pass that along, he said. Thank you, sir, she said. The reviewing authority contacted her 11 days later. The call came through official channels, which was the same as the first call, but felt different, felt in the specific way that certain official communications feel when they're correcting a wrong, like the system making an adjustment it had needed to make for longer than it had taken to make it. The investigation finding was reversed, not amended, not modified with caveats, reversed. The file would reflect the reversal with a notation summarizing the additional information that had been considered, the classification of which meant that the notation itself would be visible only at the clearance level that could read the rest of what it referred to. The reassignment was rescinded. She would be returned to Fort Campbell with her previous billet restored, effective at a date to be determined, pending her own preference on timing, which was itself unusual, the preferential timing, in which she understood as a gesture in the specific language of institutional acknowledgement of institutional failure, which was never direct, but was sometimes legible. Lieutenant Colonel Solis received the notification of the rescission at approximately the same time as Carver, through separate official channels, and came to find Carver at her desk, where she was finishing the land navigation module. Your reassignment has been rescinded, Solis said. Yes, ma'am, Carver said. I know. Solis looked at her. At the module, at the 4 pages of notes still on the corner of the desk from the first day. You're going back to Campbell, Solis said. Yes, ma'am. Are you going to tell me what happened? Carver looked at her, at the woman who had given her the training schedule binder on the first day, and asked how long she needed and taken the answer without blinking, who had processed 39 days of compressed, precise, relentlessly high-quality work from someone who had been sent here as a punishment and had treated it as an assignment, because that was simply what she did with things she was given. No, ma'am, she said. I can't. Solis considered this. Is it going to matter? Whatever it was. Is it going to make a difference? Carver thought about the convergence Phelps had described. The prosecution level targeting package. The financier. 11 months of work and the name in the document and 4 minutes and 31 seconds in a database she shouldn't have been in, and whatever came next that she would not be permitted to know the details of. Yes, ma'am, she said. I think so. Solis nodded. Once, with the clean economy of someone for whom one nod is sufficient. Take the land NAV module with you, she said. I want it finished. It's finished, ma'am, Carver said. She handed it across the desk. I finished it this morning. Solis took the module. She looked at it, looked at Carver, said nothing for a moment, in the manner of someone composing a sentence that needed to be correct. "It's been interesting having you here," she said. "Thank you, ma'am," Carver said. "It's been a good assignment." Solis looked at her with the expression of someone who is fairly certain she is being told the truth and finds the truth slightly inconvenient. "Don't tell people that," she said. "It's hard enough to get good officers assigned here without them hearing that Fort Polk is a good assignment." "I won't tell them, ma'am," Carver said. She meant it, too. She was good at not telling people things. She drove back to Fort Campbell on a Friday, which gave her the weekend before she needed to report. She used the weekend the way she used most unstructured time, with a certain deliberate purposefulness, filling it with the specific, ordinary activities that she had been building over 14 months and a 6-week detour into something that felt like a life rather than a cover. A run in the morning that was for her body rather than her training. Groceries purchased on a list that reflected her actual preferences rather than any cover identities constructed ones. An evening that was quiet. In a specific way, evenings were quiet when you were not monitoring anything. She called her father on Sunday afternoon. He was 67 and lived in Albuquerque and had worked for 29 years as a high school history teacher and knew almost nothing about what his daughter did for a living, in the way that some parents knew almost nothing about what their children did and had decided at some point that the knowing and the not knowing were both acceptable as long as the child continued to exist and call on Sundays. He asked how work was going. She said it was fine. He said he'd heard she'd had to move temporarily. She said yes, briefly. He said that sounded annoying. She said it had been okay. Actually, he said that didn't surprise him. He'd never known her to find something okay that she decided to treat as okay. She smiled at this, not a smile she performed, but the kind that happened before you decided to smile, which was the only kind she'd ever been able to produce on purpose without it feeling like something she was constructing. "How's the teaching?" she said. He talked about the teaching. She listened in the full way she listened to things that she wanted to keep rather than the efficient way she listened to things she was processing for information. It went on for 40 minutes and covered 3 different AP history classes, a student who had written a paper on Cold War intelligence operations that her father found both impressive and slightly alarming, and a disagreement with the school's principal about the history curriculum's coverage of the 1970s that had been running for approximately 3 semesters. When she hung up, the apartment was quiet. It was the kind of quiet that had taken her a long time to learn not to listen into for things that weren't there, and she had mostly learned it, and the mostly was enough for now. She had a briefing Monday morning at 0800. She had a training cycle to integrate back into and a battalion to return to, and the specific, ordinary, ongoing work of being a person who occupied a single identity in a single place and was known by a name that had always been hers. She was 37 years old. She had more than she could see from here still ahead of her. She set her alarm for 5:30 and went to bed. At Fort Campbell, Captain Marcus Webb heard about the rescission on Monday through the same informal channels that had carried the reassignment story 6 weeks earlier, and spent the better part of an afternoon trying to figure out what had changed and finding, with increasing frustration, that nothing in the available record explained it. The file he could access was the same file he'd had access to before. The investigation finding was different, reversed, with a classification notation he couldn't open. The reassignment was rescinded. The reason, as far as any document available to him was concerned, was the notation he couldn't read. He asked 2 people. Both of them said they didn't know. One of them said the word clearance in a tone that suggested the conversation was over. He was still thinking about it when Major Lena Carver walked into the battalion area on Monday morning at 0748, 12 minutes before she was required to be there, carrying a regulation briefcase and a coffee she had made herself rather than bought, and went to her office and sat down and began reviewing the training schedule she had been assigned to support. She did not explain anything to anyone. She never did. 6 months later, a network that had operated across 4 countries and 12 financial instruments for 9 years was dismantled in a coordinated action that produced 14 arrests, 3 asset seizures, and a prosecution package described in a classified internal assessment as among the most complete targeting actions conducted against a reconstituted transnational network in this operational category. The assessment was classified at a level that meant none of the 43 people at Fort Campbell who had watched Major Carver pack a cardboard box in her car on a Tuesday afternoon, or had read Captain Webb's summary of where she was going and why, or had discussed the reassignment in the break room with the satisfied energy of people who believe they understand something they don't, ever read it. The part of the assessment that noted the specific intelligence that had made the action possible, the cross-referencing of 3 separate analytical streams, the convergence point, the unauthorized database access that had identified the leverage point the targeting package required, was also classified. The name on that piece of the assessment, the name of the person whose 4 minutes and 31 seconds in a database had made the convergence possible, was Major Lena Carver. The assessment was filed. The file was sealed. The 43 cells were 44. On a Thursday morning 6 months after her return to Fort Campbell, she sat at her desk reviewing a readiness report, and the work was ordinary, and the name on the report was her own, and the office smelled of institutional coffee, and none of the people who passed her door in the hallway knew anything that would have changed how they walked past it. She preferred it this way. She always had.